The one God is said to be one essence, which is both truth and love. Truth and love are one thing, not two, and, properly defined, they can never oppose each other. It is the nature of love to be truthful to the beloved. Love bears itself without deception. One can say that love loves truth, and the truth of God reveals his love. When Jesus told Pilate that his mission was to bear witness to the truth, Pilate asked rhetorically, "Truth? What is that?" Jesus' response was nonverbal. His response was an action. It was his suffering and dying in loving obedience to the Father's will, which expressed the truth and love of his relationship with God the Father and with all of mankind. His response was an action which revealed the truth of the relationships within the Blessed Trinity and the relationship between the Blessed Trinity and each of us. Most people generally think of truth in terms of ideas or statements and the degree of their accuracy. We think in a more superficial way about truth and what is not true, and we do not generally think of how a person or thing might be true to itself or not true to itself. In other words, we are less likely to think about truth in terms of whether a creature acts true to its nature and purpose, or whether it acts contrarily and against its purpose and nature. Here we will consider, among other things, how relationships can also be true to what they ought to be, or false to what they ought to be. For example, a politician who allows himself to be swayed by a secret donor to make decisions detrimental to the population would be untrue to his position and responsibilities. His relationship with the population would be false in some way. Consider a man's daughter is spoilt and so self-centered that she has trouble sympathizing with or sharing the joy of those she considers to be her closest friends. The man is rich and can fully satisfy their material needs. They are somewhat happy with their life, but have no idea of how much more fulfilling their lives could be, or how better their lives are meant to be. The daughter loves being spoilt, and the father loves spoiling her. Both think they have a healthy relationship. Both believe that they love each other with perfect love. But is that true? According to Thomas Aquinas, love is seeking the good of the beloved. Is the man seeking his daughter's good? Does he love his daughter in the Thomistic sense? Is it love if the man never really took the time and energy to analyze whether his treatment of his daughter is beneficial to her or not? Perhaps there are appropriate ways to raise a daughter, but he never really bothered to learn. Perhaps because it was so easy to have a conflict-free relationship with her that he thought it perfect for him to give her whatever she wanted. If so, does he really love her? Actions are generally done in a context which could be in a range from perfect to highly inappropriate and wrong. Of course, some actions such as willfully killing an innocent person is always wrong in any context. There are other actions where, the more they are done out of context, they can damage or destroy the original meaning of the action itself. Eating for emotional comfort can fall into such a category. The meaning of food and its purpose can change in the mind of the emotional eater. Such a person develops a relationship with food to rival their relationship with themselves in a sense. This can lead to serious medical problems. But there are actions which are appropriate only in a highly specific context. The action of getting married is a good example of this. Without in-depth consideration, such an action can bring lifelong sorrow for both spouses. A related action is having sex, which, regardless of modern sentiments, has a restricted context. Having such marital relations with a person someone is not married to will imprint in the mind that the marital act indeed has other appropriate contexts than within a marriage. Thus, by changing the perception of the appropriate context for the action, sex performed in an untrue context in effect damages both the meaning of sex and marriage in the minds. It blinds them to some extent, and those who engage in such things might not appreciate how wonderful sex could be when kept within its God-created, perfect context. Too often they develop an unhealthy relationship with sex, which rivals their relationship with their partner. Like the father and daughter, The couple engaging in extramarital sexual relations become at least partially blind to the possibility of a truer relationship. But the falsehood of extramarital sex is a lot more egregious than a father-daughter dystopic relationship. This is because human sexuality involves not just two persons, but five. Let me repeat this because of the common misconception that once two adults are fine with it, anything is proper for them in the realm of sexual activity. For humans, the sex act, which is the marital act, involves the couple and the Holy Trinity. Different from the sexual function of other creatures, our sex act was designed by God for His direct involvement, where He retains the prerogative to create with the couple a new human person with an immortal soul, a person who is called to share His divine life forever in heaven. This makes the sex act, the marital act, extremely special and, yes, holy in a unique way. To be blind to this fact is not a slight thing. It cannot be overstated that sex should never be performed by anyone but married spouses and within a family-oriented context. Sex out of the context of marriage may be infinitely worse than the flawed relationship in the first example, between the father and his daughter. It is untrue, it is false, it is deceptive in a most egregious way. Done in its proper context, sex is an excellent way for two persons who God united to be open to the will of God and thus to unite with Christ in having themselves and others attain heaven. But when done out of its proper context, it is an act which directly opposes the truth which Christ proclaimed by His dying on the cross. It opposes the truth of the relationship between the two, and it opposes the truth proclaimed by Jesus' action, done in loving obedience to God His Father, for our chance of eternal life with Him in heaven. For the benefit of those who still, believing there is a distinction in spirit between truth and love, end up in hell, let us end with a word on love. Those who would propose that because of God's love, persons who unrepentantly engage in extramarital sex would enter heaven need to take caution. Divine love is perfectly pure and always desires the absolute best for each person. The best for each person is to be like love itself. To have any chance of being like love, one must desire to be like love. This means that one must value love. To be more specific, one must value perfectly pure love above any other thing. Love is always present to each of us and passionately wants us to choose Him as our spiritual spouse. However, love does not impose itself on anyone and never coerces anyone. Such things are impossible for love because they oppose the nature of love. The one who would be united to divine love must freely desire it. He or she must value it alone as the only motive for all of their actions. For this, one's perception must be pure, without deceptions. We might think of love as a plain-faced woman who never wears makeup. She never tries to impress anyone. She is completely comfortable within herself. She is the opposite of selfishness who always has makeup on, always trying to seduce others, always calling attention to herself to gain some personal praise or benefit. The one who practices deceit in relationships, especially sexual relationships, by that very fact chooses selfishness instead of love. By living an untrue life, a person makes a choice against love and makes a choice for fiction. If one rejects truth, one rejects love. Only God knows how many end up in hell because this basic fact is not appreciated. Fundamentally, salvation is gained by anyone who desires it with a pure heart, with a heart that is in direct opposition to falsehood.